True love does not bow to crowns, nor break beneath duty. This is the story of Courtney Thorne, a humble seamstress who stitched dreams for others until she found herself woven into a love forbidden by kingdoms. The Seamstress of Eden, a tale of hope, courage, and a love that refused to be silenced. Chapter 1. The hum of the sewing wheel was the only sound that filled the small wooden shop in Eden. Golden light spilled through the single window, falling across rolls of ivory silk, needles scattered like stars, and the woman who sat quietly among them, Courtney Thorne, the village seamstress. To most of Eden, she was ordinary, a soft-spoken young woman who kept to herself, stitching dreams for others to wear. But those who'd watched her closely swore there was something different about her hands. The way she sewed felt like music, like poetry woven through thread. Her stitches were alive, carrying emotion, memory, even hope. Every dress she made told a story, and though her own life had been unremarkable, her work carried the beauty she never dared to claim for herself. Courtney had lost her parents young, and the shop was all that remained of them. Her mother's old thimble still sat on the shelf by the window, glinting whenever sunlight touched it, a reminder that even small things could hold light. And so she worked, day after day, her head bowed, her heart full of quiet purpose. But that morning, something unusual broke the stillness. A knock. Not the kind of knock she was used to from villagers or brides-to-be. This one was firm, deliberate, carrying the weight of something official. She set down her needle, smoothed her apron, and opened the door. Two royal messengers stood there, cloaked in deep blue, the crest of Auravale embroidered across their chests. Between them was a sealed scroll tied with a golden ribbon. For Miss Courtney Thorne, by order of Her Majesty Queen Morel of Auravale. Her breath caught. The Queen? She took the scroll with trembling hands, her pulse quickening as she broke the seal. The words shimmered like a dream. The House of Auravale requests your service as the chosen designer and seamstress for the royal wedding of His Highness Prince Caelan and Her Grace Princess Seraphine Lysandra. Courtney blinked, rereading the lines again and again. Surely there had been some mistake. There were hundreds of seamstresses across the capital, far more accomplished than she. Why her? Why a quiet girl from the edge of nowhere? The messengers waited, watching her expression. When she found her voice, it was barely a whisper. I accept. Within an hour, her shop was packed. Neighbors, friends, even the mayor himself came to see the letter. Eden had never been visited by the royal seal before, and Courtney became the village's sudden pride. They wished her luck, pressed little tokens into her hands, and told her not to forget where she came from. That night, Courtney couldn't sleep. She sat by candlelight, reading the letter again, tracing her fingers over the ink as if it might vanish. Beyond the thrill was fear, not of failure, but of being seen. For so long she had hidden behind her work, letting her creations speak where she could not. Now, for the first time, the world was calling her name. By morning, she packed her belongings, her mother's thimble, her worn scissors, a roll of silk she couldn't bear to leave behind. Then she left the only home she had ever known. The journey to Auravale Castle took 2 days by carriage. As she approached the capital, the world seemed to grow larger, brighter, and colder. The castle rose above the horizon like something carved from moonlight, its towers reaching into clouds. Soldiers lined the gates. Music echoed faintly from within. Courtney's heart pounded. The air smelled of roses and rain. At the gate, an attendant led her through grand corridors, shimmering with chandeliers and marble. She passed portraits of kings and queens, their painted eyes following her every step. She tried not to stare, tried not to feel small, but the weight of history pressed around her like a crown she didn't deserve to touch.
She stopped outside a vast room draped in silver and white. "The royal atelier," the attendant said. "This will be your workshop." Courtney stepped inside. The room was magnificent. Sunlight poured through stained glass, illuminating bolts of rare fabric and threads spun with gold. She felt her fingers ache to touch them. And then behind her, a quiet voice spoke. "You're the new seamstress." She turned and found herself staring into eyes the color of a winter sky. It was Prince Caelan. Courtney froze, lowering her head in instinctive reverence. "Your Highness," she managed softly. But Caelan only smiled faintly. "No need for that here," he said. "You look frightened. I just didn't expect to be speaking with the groom." His smile tilted, bittersweet. "Neither did I." Something in his tone caught her off guard, a shadow underneath the politeness. He glanced at the unfinished mannequins, the sketches pinned to the walls. "They say your gowns hold emotion in every thread. Is that true?" She hesitated. "I only sew what I feel, Your Highness." He nodded as though that answer meant more to him than she realized. Then perhaps he murmured, turning toward the light, "You'll help make something beautiful out of a story that wasn't meant to be." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the faint echo of his boots and the lingering sense that something had just shifted. Courtney stood in silence, her heart unsteady, and for the first time she wondered, what if the threads of destiny she had always believed in were now being woven around her own heart?
Morning came to Auravale Castle like a painting come alive. Light poured through tall arched windows, scattering in soft colors across the marble halls. Bells rang faintly from distant towers, a song of order and expectation. The castle, like the kingdom it ruled, was beautiful and mercilessly disciplined. For Courtney Thorne, it felt like stepping into another world, one stitched from perfection itself. Every corridor gleamed, every servant moved in synchronized silence. Even the air smelled of lavender and law. She'd never seen such grandeur, nor felt so small within it. She had been given her quarters, a modest room near the atelier with a small bed, a wardrobe, and a single window overlooking the royal gardens. Below, the world glimmered with color, fountains, sculpted hedges, and marble benches where courtiers whispered about politics disguised as poetry. It was breathtaking and lonely. Courtney had barely unpacked her belongings when a knock sounded at her door. A young maid entered, curtsying shyly. "Good morning, Miss Thorne. Her Majesty wishes to see you." Her stomach twisted. The Queen. Courtney followed the maid through winding staircases until they reached a tall chamber guarded by soldiers in silver armor. The doors opened to reveal Queen Morelle, seated at a grand writing desk, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The Queen's beauty was of a colder kind, sharp, regal, every movement deliberate. Her eyes lifted from her parchment as Courtney curtsied. "So," she said softly, "you are the Seamstress of Eden." "Yes, Your Majesty. Am honored beyond words." Morelle studied her for a moment, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You come highly recommended. My advisors tell me your designs move people to tears. Is that so?" I swallowed. "I only try to make beauty honest, Your Majesty." A hint of a smile touched the Queen's lips, barely there. "Honesty," she said, "is rare in this place. Perhaps that's why we need you." Then her tone cooled again. "You will work closely with the bride, Princess Seraphine Lysandra. The wedding must symbolize peace, unity, and obedience. The gown will be more than a dress. It will be a declaration of hope for two kingdoms. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Morelle's eyes softened slightly. "Do not fear, Miss Thorne. We may serve different worlds, but we both understand the power of creation in silence. I, too, was a woman once asked to build beauty in silence.
Before Courtney could respond, the queen dismissed her with a nod, but the words stayed, echoing like distant thunder. We both understand the power of creation in silence. Later that afternoon, Courtney was introduced to Princess Seraphine Lysandra, the bride-to-be. She had expected someone proud, perhaps distant. Instead, the princess was warm, even curious. "I've been waiting to meet you," Seraphine said, with a bright smile, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone born to command, but too kind to wield it harshly. "They say your work captures the heart of whoever wears it." Courtney blushed faintly. "I only try to listen to the story the fabric wants to tell." "That's beautifully said," Seraphine replied, her gaze thoughtful. "Perhaps you'll help me find mine." As they spoke, Courtney noticed something unusual, a flicker of sadness behind the princess's grace. A woman dressed for duty, not desire. When the princess spoke of the upcoming union, her voice trembled ever so slightly. "It is a marriage of necessity," Seraphine admitted softly. "Not all unions begin with love, but sometimes love learns to grow in strange soil." Courtney lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. She had dreamed of love, but never expected to stand so near the edge of it, watching another woman carry it like a crown she did not want. That evening, Courtney returned to the atelier, sketching quietly beneath the warm flicker of candlelight. Her hands moved instinctively, tracing designs of flowing silk, soft embroidery, delicate beading. But her mind wasn't still. It kept replaying the queen's measured words and the princess's unspoken sorrow. The castle slept, but Courtney could not. She rose, stepping to the balcony outside the atelier for air. The night spread wide over Auravale, stars reflecting in the fountain pools below, and there, by the garden steps, she saw him again. Prince Caelan. He stood alone under a lantern, his posture strong yet weary. The crown prince, the groom, the man the world called the heart of Auravale. But his expression carried a quiet ache, like duty had carved something vital out of him. Then, as if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the distance. The world seemed to hold its breath. He didn't speak, didn't need to. There was something wordless in his look, something that asked, "What are you doing in my story?" And her heart, without her permission, answered, "Perhaps I was always meant to be here." The lantern flickered between them, a single thread of light in the dark. Then, before she could find her voice, he turned away, vanishing into the maze of gardens, leaving her with the strange certainty that she had just stepped across a line she couldn't unmake. That night, Courtney returned to her bed, but didn't sleep. In her dreams, she stood in the castle's great hall, surrounded by unfinished gowns, golden thread trailing across the marble floor. Somewhere in the silence, a voice whispered, her mother's voice. "Every stitch you make ties your heart to something greater. Be careful what you sow into fate." When she woke, the dawn light was soft, and the castle bells began to toll again. Calm, orderly, indifferent. But Courtney felt something stirring within her, a quiet rebellion she couldn't name. The Seamstress of Eden had come to create beauty for others. But here, within these walls of perfection, something unexpected was beginning to unravel, and it was her own heart.
Days turned into weeks within the glittering halls of Auravale Castle, and Courtney Thorne found herself learning the language of silence. The palace spoke through gestures, a glance between nobles, a raised eyebrow from a court advisor, the gentle clang of a teacup signaling an end to conversation. Everyone had a role, a rhythm, and she was expected to sew herself neatly into that pattern without a single thread out of place.
But Courtney was not made for stillness. Her hands longed for fabric, her heart for meaning. Most mornings, she worked in the atelier before sunrise, preparing sketches for Princess Seraphine Lysandra. The princess arrived daily, accompanied by a pair of attendants who hovered like gentle shadows. Yet, between them, between the measurements and fittings, a quiet friendship began to bloom. Seraphine was unlike anyone Courtney had ever met. Her laughter was soft but unguarded, her curiosity genuine. She asked questions few nobles dared to ask a seamstress. "Do you believe in destiny, Courtney?" she asked one morning as Courtney adjusted the lace on her bodice. Courtney hesitated. "I used to, until I learned that destiny doesn't mend torn dreams. Hands do." The princess smiled faintly, her reflection flickering in the mirror. "That's a beautiful answer. You must have a poet's heart." Courtney blushed, lowering her eyes. "No, Your Grace, just a needle and a bit of thread." "Sometimes," she murmured, "that's all it takes to hold a kingdom together." There was affection in her tone, not the distance of royalty, but the warmth of a confidant. And Courtney, who had lived her life in the shadows of others' happiness, found herself seen for the first time. As the wedding drew near, the castle's atmosphere thickened with ceremony and secrets. Diplomats arrived daily, ballrooms filled with rehearsals, musicians, and whispers of alliances. Yet, amid the grandeur, Courtney noticed something the others ignored: the way Prince Caelan seemed to drift through the days like a ghost. He performed his duties flawlessly, meetings, speeches, appearances. But his eyes, those cool, distant eyes, never truly smiled. One afternoon, as Courtney and Seraphine reviewed sketches in the garden, a shadow crossed the sun. Caelan appeared, tall and composed, his expression unreadable. "Your Highness," Seraphine greeted him. "Come, we were just discussing the gown. Would you like to see?" Caelan's gaze moved to Courtney, and the air between them tightened almost imperceptibly. "If the princess wishes," he said politely, but there was a flicker, something human, something fragile that Seraphine seemed to catch, but chose not to name. Courtney unrolled the sketches, her voice steady despite her heartbeat. "The design follows Your Highness's request. Soft lines, delicate embroidery, a symbol of unity between Auravale and Lysandra." Caelan leaned over the parchment, and for a moment, his sleeve brushed hers. The contact was accidental, brief, but it sent warmth coursing through her, sharp and unfamiliar. His voice, low and thoughtful, broke the silence. "It's beautiful," he said. "It feels alive." Seraphine watched them with a quiet smile that held no jealousy, but only a weary kind of understanding. "It should," she said softly. "A gown that binds two worlds must carry a heartbeat of its own." Later that evening, Courtney sat alone in her workshop, replaying that single word in her mind: alive. She tried to dismiss it, to bury it under layers of silk and thread, but it lingered like a note that refused to fade. When the door creaked open, she startled. And there he was again. Prince Caelan stood in the doorway, candlelight gilding his features in shades of gold and sorrow. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said gently. "I couldn't sleep." Courtney stood quickly. "Your Highness." "Please," he interrupted, his tone low. "No titles. Not here." The words caught her off guard. He stepped closer, eyes scanning the half-finished gown suspended on the mannequin. The lace shimmered faintly, threads of moonlight caught in its weave. "It's extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've never seen something so delicate. You've captured something I can't name." Courtney's voice trembled. "It's meant to tell a story, one of peace and promise." He met her gaze. "Peace and promise," he echoed, bitter amusement softening into grief. two words that rarely keep their vows. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression silenced her. He turned away, his shoulders heavy. "Do you ever feel," he said softly, "that you were born for a role you didn't choose?" Courtney hesitated. "Every day." Their eyes met again, and for the first time, they both smiled. Not the polite royal smile of duty, but the quiet recognition of kindred spirits. Two souls, bound by the weight of expectation, longing to breathe. A clock chimed in the distance, a sound that reminded them both where they stood. Caelan exhaled slowly. "You should rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow will be long." Courtney nodded, but as he left, his shadow lingered on the floor long after he was gone, stretched thin by the candlelight, like a thread waiting to be tied. The next morning, Courtney found a folded parchment by her work table. No seal, no signature, only a single line written in careful script. Beauty should not belong to silence alone. Her hands trembled as she read it. The words weren't royal, they were human. A confession hidden beneath restraint. As the sun rose over Auravale, the castle sparkled like a jewel. But deep within its walls, two hearts had begun to stir against the threads of fate. Courtney Thorne, the Seamstress of Eden, was no longer just sewing a wedding gown. She was stitching herself into a story the world would not allow. A love that whispered between stitches, daring to exist in the quiet spaces between duty and desire. And, though neither of them could yet speak it aloud, the first seam of their forbidden love had already been sewn.
Chapter 4. The castle awoke before dawn, its towers gilded in pale silver light. From her narrow window, Courtney Thorne could see the courtyard below. Servants scurrying with trays, guards switching posts, florists carrying armfuls of lilies and roses for the royal wedding only bays away. Everything shimmered with purpose. Everyone knew their place. Everyone except her. Courtney had been summoned to the Great Hall that morning, where Princess Seraphine Lysandra would review the nearly completed wedding gown. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Each bead, each stitch, each delicate thread was more than craft. It was a prayer she had whispered into fabric, a secret piece of her heart stitched between layers of lace. But one part of her work was hidden, a detail no one else knew about. A single golden thread, thin as sunlight, woven along the inner lining of the gown, invisible from the outside, but there, quietly glinting when light touched just right. It wasn't vanity or rebellion, it was hope. Hope that love, even when unseen, still existed somewhere within the folds of duty. She called it the hidden stitch. Princess Seraphine entered the atelier just as the final hem was being pressed. Her beauty that morning seemed almost fragile, the glow of a woman stepping into destiny, and yet burdened by the knowledge of what that destiny demanded. "It's magnificent," Seraphine whispered as Courtney unveiled the gown. "You've given me wings made of fabric." Courtney smiled softly. "It's the least I could do for a woman who still believes in love." The princess's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. "And you, Courtney, do you still believe in it?" A pause, long enough to hold the truth. "I think I do," Courtney said quietly, "even when it hides from me." Seraphine nodded, as if understanding more than words could say. "Then we are alike, you and I." Before Courtney could reply, the doors opened, and Prince Caelan stepped in. The air shifted, not just for her, but for Seraphine too. There was affection in the princess's eyes, yet beneath it something mournful, as if she knew she was marrying not out of love, but out of the crown's command. Caelan's eyes met Courtney's briefly, and in that fleeting exchange, a world unfolded, a look that said what both were too afraid to speak.
Seraphine's voice broke the silence. "Brother, what do you think?" Brother. The word struck Courtney like a spark. She had forgotten, in the quiet pulse of her feelings, that Caelan and Seraphine were not strangers bound by duty alone. They were family by alliance. Caelan, the Prince of Auravale, and Seraphine, the Princess of Lysandra, to be united to seal a kingdom's fragile peace. But the look in his eyes betrayed no joy. "It's beautiful," Caelan said finally, his tone measured. "You've outdone yourself, Miss Thorne." The way he said her name was careful, reverent even, like a secret tucked behind courtesy. That evening, when the halls emptied and the courtyards held silent, Courtney returned to her workshop to store the gown. Moonlight spilled across the fabric like liquid silver. She ran her fingers gently along the hem, and there it was, her golden stitch glimmering softly beneath the surface. "It's perfect," a voice said behind her. She turned sharply. Caelan stood in the doorway once more, candlelight flickering across his features. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should you," he replied. "But here we are." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until they stood within a breath of each other. "You've done something remarkable," he said, eyes tracing the gown. "I can feel your soul in every thread." Courtney swallowed hard. "My work isn't meant to be seen that way, Your Highness." "Then perhaps the world has been blind," he murmured. Her pulse quickened. She turned away, forcing calm into her voice. "You should go. Someone will notice." He hesitated, and for a moment she thought he would leave, but instead his voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "I saw it." She froze. "Saw what?" "The golden thread," he said. "The one you hid inside the gown." Her heart stuttered. "It's symbolic," she said quickly. "A tradition among seamstresses. For luck." He smiled faintly. "Luck or love?" Her breath caught. She wanted to lie, to deflect, but the truth burned too bright. "Maybe both." For a long time they stood there in silence, the seamstress and the prince, two hearts trembling against the edges of a fate neither could change. Then Caelan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of parchment. He placed it gently on her work table. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said softly, "but if you ever need to remember that someone sees you, truly sees you, read this." Before she could speak, he turned and left, footsteps fading down the hall. Courtney waited until he was gone before opening the note. "There are two kinds of beauty, the kind the world praises and the kind that saves it. Yours is the latter. See." Her hands trembled as tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was enough to remind her she wasn't invisible, that somewhere within the machinery of destiny, her existence mattered. The next morning, whispers filled the castle, not about gowns or treaties, but about letters found and eyes that lingered too long. The attendants gossiped softly. Even the head seamstress gave Courtney a wary glance. But Courtney only smiled faintly as she worked, her needle moving faster than ever. Because she had already decided something, quietly, fiercely, within herself. She would not give up on beauty. She would not surrender her heart to fear. And no matter what storm awaited her, she would keep sewing hope into every thread. The hidden stitch was no longer just hers. It belonged to both of them now, a promise that love, once found, could never be entirely unstitched.
Chapter 5. The sound of rain against glass filled the atelier that morning, soft, persistent, and oddly intimate. Courtney Thorne worked by candlelight, her fingers deft and steady, though her heart fluttered like a trapped bird beneath her ribs. It had been 3 days since she found the note, 3 days since the prince's words had burned themselves into her thoughts like a secret melody.
There are two kinds of beauty, the kind the world praises and the kind that saves it. She read it in her mind over and over again until the ink felt written on her heart. But love, real, forbidden love, had a way of unraveling even the most disciplined hands. The castle was humming that day. Courtiers gathered in marble corridors to discuss the coming ceremony. Musicians rehearsed in the West Wing, and the head of staff barked orders until his voice turned raw. Yet, amid all the chaos, a single whisper began to weave through the air, quiet, poisonous, and curious. "The prince visits the seamstress," someone murmured. "At night, they say. She hides golden threads in the princess's gown, perhaps charms, or love spells." Courtney heard them, of course. Servants often forgot that walls in palaces had ears, but she said nothing. She only worked faster, her needle flashing under the dim light like a blade. That afternoon, a summons came from Princess Seraphine Lysandra herself. Her pulse quickened as she followed the guards up the grand staircase into the royal library, a cathedral of books and secrets. Seraphine stood near the tall windows, her back to the storm, her gown a whisper of ivory silk. "Miss Thorne," she said without turning, "they speak of you in the halls." Her throat tightened. "Your Grace, Seraphine lifted a hand, silencing her. "I do not care for gossip, but I do care for truth." Courtney bowed her head. "I've done nothing to dishonor your house." "Then you have nothing to fear," the princess said softly. She turned then, her eyes calm, intelligent, but touched with sorrow. "Still, be careful. In this palace, even kindness can be misunderstood as conspiracy." Courtney hesitated. "You think someone is watching?" Seraphine's lips curved into a sad smile. "Not watching, Miss Thorne. Waiting." That night, the rain still fell, heavier now, as if the sky itself carried too much to say. Courtney remained in the sewing room long after the others left, adjusting the train of the gown once more. She didn't hear the door open, she only felt the air shift, the faint warmth of another presence. "Courtney," her breath caught. Prince Caelan stepped from the shadows, his cloak damp, his eyes shadowed with something that wasn't quite fear, but something near it. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, heart pounding. "I had to see you. They're talking, and it's my fault." Her hand tightened around the spool of thread. "If they find out, they won't. But if I'm to marry Seraphine, there's something I need to tell you first." Courtney forced a small, trembling smile. "You don't owe me anything." "Don't I?" His voice cracked softly. "You see me, not as a prince, not as the symbol of a treaty, but as a man who's tired of being what everyone expects." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then let it hover just above hers, close enough to feel the warmth, but not enough to touch. "Do you ever wish you could run?" Her lips parted. "Every day." "And if I did," he whispered, "if I left it all behind, the vows, the crown, the endless performance, would you come with me?" Silence filled the room. Only the sound of the rain, only the soft rhythm of their hearts betraying them both. "I can't," she said finally, voice trembling, "because the world would still find us, and I want to believe love can exist without having to run." Caelan's eyes glistened with emotion he couldn't hide. "Then what do we do?" Courtney lifted her chin, her voice steady now. "We wait. We hope. and we hold onto the truth quietly, like a secret stitched beneath silk." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let this be our promise." And before she could protest, he leaned down, not to kiss her, not yet, but to rest his forehead against hers, a moment suspended in eternity. The prince and the seamstress, hearts bound in silence, breathing the same fragile hope. When he left, Courtney stood alone in the flickering candlelight, her eyes glistening with both joy and fear. The world outside was cruel, but for the first time, she didn't feel small within it, because somewhere between duty and desire, she had found something the world could not dictate. A love brave enough to stay silent until the right moment to speak. By morning, the whispers would grow louder. By evening, Seraphine would suspect more, and before the week's end, the golden stitch would no longer be a secret. But Courtney didn't know that yet. She only knew the feeling of a promise, soft as silk, strong as truth, binding two souls in quiet defiance.
Chapter 6. The palace glittered with preparations for joy, but beneath its polished floors and perfumed corridors, unease whispered like wind through hollow halls. Rumors no longer moved like smoke. They had form now, direction, and names. And one of those names was Courtney Thorne. The morning began with sunlight fractured through stained glass, painting the sewing chamber in colors too lovely for the mood that lingered within it. Courtney sat at her work table, the golden thread glinting faintly beside her. The world around her spun with celebration, the royal wedding, only 5 days away. But her heart could not keep pace with the music. Every stitch she made now felt like a betrayal. Every breath was a reminder of a truth she dared not speak. "Courtney." The soft voice pulled her from thought. It was Princess Seraphine, standing by the doorway, her hands clasped before her like a prayer. Her expression was gentle, but her eyes searched. "Your Grace," Courtney said, rising quickly. "Forgive me, I didn't hear you enter." Seraphine smiled faintly. "You seem far away today. Tell me, what world do you visit when you drift so deeply into thought?" Courtney hesitated, hands trembling slightly. "Only the world of cloth and thread, Your Grace. It's where I feel safe." Seraphine walked closer, her gown whispering against the floor. "Safe," she echoed softly. "That's a rare word here." Her reflection caught in the tall mirror behind Courtney. Radiant, regal, but there was something else. A fragility that came not from weakness, but from knowing one's life had stopped belonging to oneself. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured, almost to herself, "if our hearts choose rebellion only because they've forgotten freedom?" Courtney met her gaze in the mirror. "Perhaps the heart doesn't forget, Your Grace. It simply waits for a moment it dares to remember." The princess turned then, eyes glistening with the faint sheen of withheld tears. "You speak like someone who knows what it means to wait." Courtney wanted to look away, but couldn't. Her silence said more than words ever could. And Seraphine, ever perceptive, ever poised, saw the tremor of truth hidden behind the calm. That evening, the palace hosted a rehearsal for the ceremony. Music swelled in the grand ballroom, candles reflecting off crystal chandeliers. Courtney stood at the edge of the hall with other attendants, watching as Seraphine and Prince Caelan practiced their slow procession toward the throne dais. Every movement was perfect, every smile rehearsed. But Caelan's eyes, when they met Courtney's across the glittering room, betrayed everything the world wasn't meant to see. Just one glance,
and her heart betrayed her entirely. Seraphine caught that glance too. She didn't flinch, didn't show anger, didn't speak, but something shifted within her. Not fury, but sorrow, quiet, and deep. The orchestra continued to play. The dance went on. But in that one suspended heartbeat, the web of silence began to tremble. Later that night, Courtney found herself standing before the great mirror in her workshop, the same mirror where the princess had seen her reflection earlier that day. She stared at her own face, pale under the candlelight, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness and fear. She had spent her life blending in, invisible, unremarkable, and yet somehow she had drawn the gaze of a prince and the suspicion of a princess. "Who are you becoming?" she whispered to the glass. The mirror offered no mercy, only truth. Behind her reflection, she saw the faint shimmer of the gown, Seraphine's gown, hanging by the wall, the symbol of everything that had bound her heart and hands to this place. She walked to it slowly and touched the hidden lining, tracing her golden stitch with trembling fingers. It's only love. Why must love be a crime? Tears gathered but did not fall, because she couldn't afford them. Not now. When the door creaked open behind her, she didn't turn. "I thought I might find you here," said a familiar voice, low, tired, tender. "Caelan." Courtney closed her eyes. "You shouldn't." "I know. But every time I tell myself to stay away, I hear your silence louder than my own heartbeat." She turned then, meeting his gaze, the kind that held both fire and ruin. "They're watching us, Caelan. Seraphine suspects, the court whispers. Let them. They can command our words, but not our hearts." Courtney shook her head, pain in her voice. "Your promise to her. She deserves a man who looks at her the way you look at me. And you deserve a world that doesn't punish you for being loved." For a moment, neither spoke. The candles flickered, casting their faces in gold and shadow. Then Caelan reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate silk mask, pale silver, embroidered with the same golden thread Courtney used. He held it out to her. "For the masquerade before the wedding. I had it made for you, so that for one night the world won't see who you are, and we can exist, if only in secret." Courtney took the mask, her fingers brushing his. Her voice trembled. "And when the mask comes off?" Jalen smiled sadly. "Then I will still know your face, even if the world pretends not to know." When he left, Courtney stood alone once more. She lifted the mask and looked into the mirror, her reflection now half hidden, half free. And for the first time, she didn't feel powerless. Because even if the world demanded she hide her heart, she knew love was no longer something to be ashamed of. The mirror might show the mask, but beneath it, love had already found its truth. The night of the masquerade arrived, cloaked in gold and thunder. The palace of Lysandra stood alive with candlelight, each window spilling brilliance into the storm-dark sky. Musicians tuned their violins, courtiers adorned themselves with masks of lace, feather, and crystal. The ballroom was a cathedral of indulgence, where power danced with deception, and truth was something to be hidden behind a smile. For the world, it was a night of celebration. For Courtney Thorne, it was a night of surrender. She stood in her small chamber, staring at the mask Prince Caelan of Auravale had given her, pale silver silk, stitched with threads of gold so delicate that they caught the candlelight like liquid sun. It felt almost alive, whispering all the things she dared not say. Her hands trembled as she tied the ribbons behind her head. The reflection that looked back at her was unrecognizable, softer, bolder, almost free. She wore a gown of midnight blue, borrowed from the royal seamstress's collection, its neckline brushed with lace and subtle embroidery that shimmered when she moved. It wasn't extravagance that made her beautiful that night, but courage. Courage had a glow of its own. The ballroom was already overflowing when she arrived. Laughter mingled with the hum of violins. The air was heavy with perfume and champagne. Masks of every color drifted like butterflies across the marble floor. Courtney felt invisible at first, just another silhouette among many, until her gaze found him, Prince Caelan of Auravale, standing at the far end of the room. His mask was black velvet edged in gold, his attire immaculate, yet his eyes, even half hidden, found her instantly. A silent recognition passed between them, a quiet breath of, "There you are." And in that moment, the room ceased to exist. He approached slowly, through a sea of dancers and flickering light. When he reached her, he bowed, the gesture formal, but his voice soft as rain. "May I have this dance?" Courtney's pulse thundered in her ears. "You may, Your Highness." He smiled faintly. "Tonight I am no prince, just a man who's waited far too long to hold your hand." Her heart stilled, then yielded. "Then I am no seamstress, just a woman who forgot she wasn't allowed to dream." He took her hand, and together they stepped into the music. The waltz began, slow, mournful, and full of longing. As they moved, their steps aligned effortlessly, as if they had danced in another life. His hand rested at her waist, her fingers brushed the back of his neck, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath his skin. Around them, the world shimmered, a blur of silks and laughter, of masks concealing secrets that would never see daylight. But for them, everything was suddenly clear. "I keep thinking," Caelan murmured as they turned beneath the chandelier, "how unfair it is that the world demands perfection but punishes truth." Courtney's gaze lifted to his. "And yet, here we are, pretending to be something we're not." He smiled sadly. "Pretending, perhaps, but feeling, that's real." She wanted to answer, but words would have only broken the spell. So she let the music speak for her, moving closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath against her temple. For one song, one heartbeat of a night, they existed outside of fear. When the waltz ended, applause rippled through the hall. Caelan bowed to her again, but this time there was no jest in his tone. "Meet me in the garden when the final song ends." Courtney nodded, her chest tight with both dread and desire. "You shouldn't risk it." "I already have," he replied. The garden was alive with lanterns when she found him. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of roses and wet earth. The world seemed to hush as he turned toward her. Without the crowd, without the music, he looked almost human again. The weight of the crown gone, the exhaustion of duty softened by the glow of moonlight. "Courtney," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried to stop this, tried to convince myself it's madness. But the truth is, every thread of this world feels empty without you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Caelan." He stepped closer. "I know what's at stake. The treaty. My father's pride. Princess Seraphine's future. But when I see you, I remember I'm still alive." She shook her head, tears trembling. And if they find us, then they'll finally see what love looks like when it refuses to hide. And then, without another word, he kissed her. The world fell away, the walls, the masks, the consequences. For that one stolen instant, they were not prince and seamstress, but soul and soul. The rain began again, soft and forgiving, falling around them like a benediction. It was a kiss that defied everything, law, blood, duty, and yet felt more sacred than any vow spoken beneath a crown. But even as their lips parted, the moment shattered. A sound, faint, sharp, from the shadows. A gasp. Courtney turned, and through the shimmer of rain, she saw a figure standing among the roses. A mask of silver, a gown of ivory. Princess Seraphine Lysandra. Her face was pale beneath the lantern light, her eyes wide with disbelief and pain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, without a word, Seraphine turned and vanished into the storm. Courtney's breath caught. "Caelan." "I'll find her," he said, his voice breaking. "Go, please, before they come." She wanted to protest, but the urgency in his eyes left no room. With trembling hands, she lifted her skirts and fled through the mist, her heart a storm of its own. As the garden emptied and thunder rolled once more across the sky, the roses trembled in the wind, red, wet, and silent witnesses to a love that could no longer hide behind silk or shadow. And though the night had begun with masks, it ended with truth. Beautiful. Terrible. Unstoppable.
The morning after the masquerade dawned cold and gray. The city of Lysandra still glittered from the night's celebration, unaware that beneath its polished calm, a single secret trembled, ready to split kingdoms apart. Courtney hadn't slept. She sat by her small window, watching the rain slide down the glass, each drop catching light like liquid glass. The mask still lay on her work table, ribbons frayed, silk damp from the storm. It looked like something fragile that had once held magic, and now only held memory. Her fingers hovered over it, but never touched. The feel of his hand, his breath, his kiss, all of it burned in her mind like forbidden sunlight. She should have felt regret. She felt only ache, deep and aching, the kind that lived somewhere between love and ruin. Far across the palace, Princess Seraphine Lysandra stood before her mirror, her mask shattered at her feet. The reflection that stared back at her was not the poised royal of last night, but a woman betrayed. She had not wanted this marriage any more than Caelan had. It was duty, a chain made of silken words and political necessity. Yet she had accepted it with grace. She had believed, perhaps foolishly, that someday affection might follow. But the image of him, her betrothed, holding another beneath the rain, would not leave her. A seamstress, a servant, and yet the way he had looked at her, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. A quiet burning truth rose inside her. It was not love that she envied, it was freedom. When Prince Caelan of Auravale entered the council hall later that morning, the air was already thick with unease. King Aldrich of Lysandra sat at the head of the marble table, his robes heavy with gold thread. Around him, advisors murmured, their tones low and cutting. At the far end, Princess Seraphine sat rigid, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze like winter glass. Caelan bowed, his pulse steady only on the surface. "My lord, if this is about last night's celebration, it is about disgrace," King Aldrich interrupted. "Rumors spread faster than plague, Prince of Auravale. They speak of betrayal in the gardens of my own palace." A breath caught in Caelan's throat.
Rumors are the sport of idle tongues. Then you deny it. Caelan's gaze flicked toward Seraphine. Her eyes met his, not with hatred, but something more dangerous. Pity. Resolute. "I deny nothing," he said softly. The silence that followed was thunder. Outside the council chamber, Courtney was intercepted by a palace attendant, her apron smeared with dye, her eyes wide with worry. "Courtney, the guards are asking questions. About last night. About you." Courtney froze. What kind of questions? The kind that end in exile, or worse. Whatever happened in those gardens, someone saw. You must be careful. The attendant pressed a trembling hand to her arm before hurrying away, leaving Courtney alone in the corridor. Her stomach turned cold. Every step back to her chamber felt heavier, the walls seeming to close in. When she reached her small room, she saw it immediately. The mask was gone. Someone had taken it. A knock came at her door. 3 soft raps. When she opened it, Caelan stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They know," he said simply. "Seraphine saw us." Her breath left her body like a wind-extinguishing flame. "Then it's over," she murmured. "Everything we built, it ends here." "No," his voice broke on the word. "Not like this. I won't let them use her or you to bind me to a lie." "Caelan, please," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're a prince. You have duties, a realm, a future that doesn't belong to you alone." He took her hands, pressing them to his heart. "Then let them call me traitor. Let them strip the crown from my head. I'd rather be nothing than live a life without truth." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe love could conquer the machinery of empires, but she knew the world beyond their hearts was built of harder stone. In the great hall that afternoon, the royal herald announced what all had feared. The alliance between Lysandra and Auravale was suspended, the marriage treaty broken. War whispers began to stir, faint but deadly. Princess Seraphine, to everyone's surprise, requested a private meeting with Courtney Thorne. The guards escorted her to the rose courtyard, where Seraphine stood alone, no crown, no jewels, only quiet composure. "You love him," the princess said without preamble. Courtney bowed her head. "Yes, Your Highness." "And he loves you." Tears threatened, but Courtney held firm. "He does." The princess's voice softened. "Then you both stand on a blade's edge. The court will not forgive this. My father will not forgive this." Courtney met her eyes. "Then why summon me?" The princess looked towards the horizon, gray and endless. "Because I once thought love was something one could earn through duty. I now see it is something you can only surrender to. And though I may lose what was never mine, I will not be the one who buries yours." Courtney's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I will tell my father I was mistaken, that I refuse the marriage." Courtney's tears fell freely now. "Why?" Because if love is to mean anything at all, it must free, not bind." That night a storm broke again over Lysandra, wild and unrelenting. But this time, Courtney didn't watch from her window. She ran through it, her heart pounding, her skirts soaked, the world roaring around her, until she saw him waiting beyond the gates, his cloak pulled close against the wind. "Seraphine knows," she said breathlessly. "She won't stand in our way." He looked at her, astonished, disbelieving, then took her face in his hands, rain spilling between them like light. Then the world just shifted, and for once, it turned in our favor. And as thunder rolled over the kingdom, Prince Caelan of Auravale and Courtney Thorne, the seamstress who had stolen his heart, disappeared into the night, not running from love, but toward it. For love, when true, does not kneel to crowns. It rises, like a storm.
Chapter 9. The rain did not stop for 3 days.
By the time they reached the foothills beyond Lysandra, the world had turned to mist and mud. Courtney Thorne rode behind Prince Caelan of Auravale on a single horse, her hands gripping his coat, the warmth of him the only constant in a landscape that seemed to dissolve around them. They had no escort, no banner, no proof of who they were, only the faint echo of a crown left behind and a love the world refused to bless. The path wound through pine forests, the scent of resin and damp earth thick in the air. Each mile carried them farther from the lives they had known and deeper into the unknown. But for the first time, Courtney felt the air tastes like freedom. Raw, wild, terrifying, and beautiful. When they stopped for rest, the prince dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering a heartbeat too long. They found shelter in an abandoned watchtower, its stones dark with moss, its roof half caved to the sky. Courtney built a small fire from the scraps of dry wood she could gather. The flame caught reluctantly, then brightened, painting Caelan's face in shades of gold and shadow. He was no longer the perfect prince of courtly myth. His jaw was unshaven, his hair damp and tangled, his cloak torn at the edge, yet there was something almost sacred in the way the stormlight touched him, a man stripped of duty, left only with truth. "You're quiet," he said softly. "I'm afraid if I speak, this will vanish. Like a dream." He moved closer. "Then let's not wake up." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head gently. "You still have a kingdom, a people who need you." "And what of you?" he asked. "What do you need, Courtney?" Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering in the firelight. To be seen, not as a mistake, not as a whisper of scandal, just seen. He reached out, his thumb brushing the soot from her cheek. "Then let this be the start." And in the hush of the ruined tower, as rain whispered against stone, he kissed her, slow and sure, not with desperation this time, but with promise. By dawn, they were back on the road. The land grew wilder as they crossed into the borderlands between Lysandra and Auravale, a region of rolling fields and silent valleys where the old gods were still whispered about by shepherds and travelers. Once, Caelan had ridden through these lands with banners and guards, the air thick with ceremony. Now he moved through them as a fugitive, and for the first time, he felt at peace. At a narrow stream, they stopped to water the horse. Courtney knelt, washing her hands in the icy water, her reflection rippling, a seamstress no longer defined by thread or station, but by the choices she had made. "Do you regret it?" she asked without looking up. "Leaving the palace? No. Choosing me." Caelan knelt beside her, dipping his hand into the stream until their reflections merged. Every man is given a moment that defines him. Some choose crowns, others peace. I chose the truth. Her throat tightened. "And if truth costs you everything?" "Then it was worth the price." The words hung between them, bright as sunlight breaking through clouds. But peace, like love, was never free. By evening, they reached the old outpost near the Silverwood Forest, a place once used by traders, now abandoned. Caelan lit a torch and led the way through the gate. That's when he saw it, a single sigil carved into the wood, the crest of Auravale. Fresh. Courtney's heart lurched. "They've been here." "Or they're still near," he said, scanning the shadows. Before she could reply, movement flickered at the edge of the torchlight, armored figures stepping into view. The glint of steel, the glimmer of royal insignia. Caelan drew his sword. "Stay behind me." A familiar voice rang out through the rain. "Stand down, brother." Courtney froze. From the darkness emerged a man with Caelan's eyes. Older, colder, Lord Regent Darius of Auravale, his half-brother and the one who ruled in Caelan's stead during the peace talks. "Running away with a commoner. Tell me, did she stitch your honor into her gown before you left?" "Watch your words," Caelan warned, but Darius only smirked. You've disgraced our house. Father's name is ash because of you, and now you bring this seamstress into our borders like a trophy?" Courtney's voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. "He's no disgrace. He's a man who chose love over power. You wouldn't understand that." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Even they could hear the truth in her words. Darius's expression darkened. "Seize them." Steel clashed in the rain. Caelan fought like a man with nothing left to lose, his movements precise, furious, almost poetic. Courtney stood near the fire, gripping a fallen branch like a weapon, her heart a drum of fear and faith. Then, silence. Darius lay on the ground, disarmed but alive, rain pooling around him. Caelan lowered his blade. "No more blood. Tell father I'm done living in his shadow." He turned, took Courtney's hand, and together they fled into Silverwood, the forest swallowing them whole, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. They did not stop until dawn. The forest was quiet, filled with the smell of wet earth and pine. Caelan collapsed beside a fallen tree, breathing hard. Courtney knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "You could have killed him." "I could have, but I would have lost something greater than my crown." "What's that?" "Myself." She smiled through her tears. "Then maybe there's still hope for the world after all." He pulled her close, the first rays of sun touching their faces through the trees, and for that fleeting moment, amid exile and ruin, love did not feel forbidden. It felt like destiny finding its way home.
Dawn broke over Silverwood Forest like a secret whispered to the earth. Pale mist lingered between the trees, and light slid through the branches like threads of gold, weaving silence, promise, and the faint sound of footsteps through dew-soaked grass. Courtney Thorne walked beside Prince Caelan of Auravale, her cloak damp, her breath visible in the morning chill. For days, they had followed the river north, keeping to the hidden paths known only to hunters and smugglers. Their provisions were nearly gone, but the further they went, the lighter Caelan's face became, as if with every mile, a crown fell further behind him. They stopped near a clearing where the ruins of an old chapel stood, the stone walls half collapsed, a tree growing through what had once been the altar. Courtney traced the edge of the weathered bricks, her fingers brushing the carved sigil of Auravale, a phoenix rising from flame. "It's strange. Your kingdom's symbol is rebirth, yet your brother rules by fear." Caelan knelt to wash his hands in the stream beside the chapel. "Darius believes that to rise, something else must burn." "And what do you believe?" He looked up, eyes steady. "That love is not fire's enemy, it's what survives it." Courtney smiled faintly. "Then maybe the phoenix was never your brother's symbol at all." They stayed there for a time, building a small campfire beneath the trees. The world around them was peaceful. Birds song, leaves rustling, the steady hum of a new day. But peace, Courtney knew, had a fragile pulse. By midday, Caelan's injury, a shallow cut along his shoulder from the skirmish, had begun to ache. She tore a strip from her cloak and bound it carefully, her hands gentle. He winced, then smiled. "You'd have made a better healer than a seamstress." She met his gaze. "Thread is thread, my prince. Whether mending skin or silk, it's the same act of faith." His breath caught, not at the words, but at the warmth behind them. "You still call me that." "What?" "My prince, as if the world hasn't taken that from me." She hesitated, then touched his cheek. "Because no one can take what was never theirs to give." That evening, a faint rumble echoed across the valley. Drums. Caelan stood quickly, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "Patrols. My father's men." "How far?" "Too close." They packed their few belongings and crossed the ravine under cover of twilight. The air grew colder, the path steeper.
The forest opened to a ridge overlooking the Vale of Auravale, where the towers of the royal city glimmered faintly in the distance. Home, and yet not. Courtney's hand found his. It's beautiful. He nodded slowly. And haunted. Every stone down there was built on duty and silence. She glanced at him. And now? Now, it will remember love too. They camped on the ridge that night. The stars came out in sheets, vast, silver, infinite. Courtney lay beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her thoughts full of the life they might build beyond kingdoms and vows. But sleep did not come easily, because in the quiet, she heard it. Movement. A shadow detached itself from the trees, stepping into the firelight. A man, cloaked, his face half hidden. Caelan rose instantly, drawing his dagger. "Who are you?" The man lifted his hands in peace. "An ally, if you'll still have one." Courtney's breath caught. The voice, calm, deliberate, was unmistakable. Lord Rowan, the captain of the royal guard, once Caelan's closest friend, the man who had taught him to wield a sword, who had vanished when Darius took command. "You shouldn't be here," Caelan said warily. "I could say the same, but the world's turned upside down, hasn't it? And between tyrants and lovers, I'd rather stand with the ones who remember what's worth bleeding for." Courtney exchanged a look with Caelan. Hope flickered, fragile and real. Rowan sat beside the fire, his eyes shadowed. "Your brothers seized full control of Auravale. He claims you're dead, a victim of Lysandra's betrayal. He's already mobilizing troops to avenge you." Caelan's jaw tightened. "He means to start a war." Rowan nodded. "Unless you return, alive, and claim what's rightfully yours." Courtney's pulse quickened. "But if he returns, they'll kill him." "Not if we reach the city first," Rowan said. "The people still whisper your name, Caelan. You were the Prince of Mercy, the one who walked among them. They remember." Caelan's eyes burned with 1,000 unspoken things: fear, anger, yearning. "I left that world behind." Rowan looked at Courtney. "Did you? Because she's part of it now, and if you run forever, you'll give Darius the one thing you never wanted him to have, the right to rewrite your story." Silence fell. The fire popped softly, throwing gold into the dark. Courtney reached for Caelan's hand. "Maybe Rowan's right. Maybe we stop running." He turned toward her, searching her face, the steadiness, the quiet faith that had carried him through every storm. "Courtney," he whispered, "if I return, you'll be hunted, reviled, no longer a whisper, but a target." She smiled sadly. "You forget, I was invisible once. I won't be again." The wind stirred her hair, carrying her words into the night like a vow. Caelan exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Then we go back, but not as prince and seamstress, as truth and justice." Rowan's eyes glimmered in the firelight. "Then the phoenix rises again." Before dawn, they broke camp. The city of Auravale shimmered faintly ahead, cloaked in fog and the sound of distant bells. Somewhere beyond those walls waited betrayal, redemption, and a love the world still did not understand. But Courtney felt no fear. She felt purpose, because love, she realized, was not about escaping the world. It was about changing it, one heartbeat at a time. And when Prince Caelan took her hand and whispered, "Ready?" she answered with a steady, fearless smile. "Always."
The gates of Auravale loomed beneath a dawn as pale as grief. Mist clung to the city walls,
veiling its marble towers and gold-tipped spires, a kingdom still asleep, unaware that its lost prince had come home. Courtney Thorne stood cloaked and hooded beside Prince Caelan of Auravale and Lord Rowan, the chill of morning pressing into her bones. The road that led to the city glistened with dew, and the faint toll of the cathedral bell carried across the valley, a sound both sacred and sorrowful. "It's been many months," Caelan murmured, his eyes on the distant ramparts. Courtney's hand found his. "They do. The world remembers kindness, even when men try to erase it." They entered through the east gate, hidden among a caravan of merchants bringing silks and spices from the borderlands. Rowan had forged their documents and bribed a sentry, but tension hung in the air like smoke. Courtney's heart raced as the guards inspected each wagon. When one paused at hers, his torchlight catching her face beneath the hood, she forced herself to breathe evenly. "Your name?" the guard demanded. "Lena," she said softly, "a seamstress for the House of Lysandra." The guard frowned, then nodded. "Go on." As the wagon rolled past, Courtney dared a glance at Caelan. He exhaled quietly, relief flickering across his face. For the first time since their flight, the prince's world, the marble streets, the scent of jasmine from the royal gardens, the glimmer of the grand fountain, spread before them again. Auravale had changed. The banners of King Darius hung from every tower, black and crimson, stitched with the phoenix. But the wings were no longer open. They were bound. Rowan led them through back alleys and shadowed courtyards, his tone low and urgent. "The king believes you're dead, Caelan. That's our advantage. But if word spreads too fast, he'll turn the city into a trap." "We can't stay hidden forever," Caelan said. "No," Rowan agreed. "But you can show the people what he can't hide, that the true heir lives." Courtney looked around. Everywhere she saw fear. Shopkeepers whispering behind shutters, soldiers patrolling in pairs, faces that had forgotten how to hope. She touched the folds of her cloak. Beneath it she carried her needle, her scissors and thread. Small things, simple things, yet somehow they felt heavier than any weapon. That evening, they found shelter in the old tailor quarter, once the heart of her trade. Most shops were shuttered now, their signs faded. Courtney paused before one, her breath catching. The window still bore the faint lettering, "Thorne and Daughters, Seamstresses of Eden." Her mother's shop. She stepped closer, fingertips gracing the dusty glass. "This is where I learned to sew, where I dreamed of beauty before I knew what it cost." Caelan stood beside her, his expression soft. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I dream of freedom stitched from love." Later that night, in the candle-lit quiet of the workshop, Rowan unfolded a map. "Tomorrow, there will be a procession, Darius presenting his new alliance with the southern provinces. If the people see you, Caelan, alive and standing beside her," he nodded towards Courtney, "you won't need armies. You'll have the hearts of your kingdom." Caelan hesitated. "He'll kill anyone who stands with me." Rowan's eyes hardened. "He already does, every day." Courtney looked between them, then stepped forward. "Then let's show them what he can't destroy. Truth, hope, love that defied his crown." Caelan turned to her, his voice low, filled with something raw and unguarded. "You'd risk everything for that?" Her reply was steady, unwavering. "For you, I already have." The next morning, the city was alive with the hum of ceremony. Trumpets blared, flags waved. From the palace balcony, King Darius stood in gleaming armor beside Princess Seraphine Lysandra, who watched the crowd with veiled sorrow. Beneath the gathered throng, hidden among commoners and traders, Courtney and Caelan waited. Rowan's voice murmured in his ear, "Now, when the king raises the chalice, step forward." Caelan's heart thundered. Every breath felt like a lifetime. He turned to Courtney. "Whatever happens next." "I know," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "We face it together." As Darius lifted the bolding chalice, proclaiming the unity of his reign, the crowd stirred, gasps rippling outward. A figure moved from the shadows of the square. The lost prince. Caelan stepped into the light, cloak falling away, eyes burning like the sunrise over stone. The murmurs grew. The prince lives." Darius froze mid-speech. His hand tightened on the chalice. "Impossible," he hissed. Courtney moved to Caelan's side. The people saw her too, a seamstress, in simple garb, her head held high beside a man who had once ruled their hearts. Together, they were truth made visible. "Brother," Caelan's voice rang clear, steady. "You built your throne on lies. I've come to end them." Darius's expression twisted. "End them? You left the people to rot, while I saved them." Courtney's voice cut through the silence. "You saved no one. You silenced them, but not anymore." Her courage seemed to ignite the crowd. Voices rose, hands lifted, the square filled with the sound of awakening. Seraphine stepped forward from the balcony, her eyes glistening. "Enough, Darius," she whispered. "You cannot kill what was born of love." Guards surrounded the dais, swords drawn, but they hesitated. For the first time, loyalty faltered, because in Caelan's eyes they saw not rebellion but grace, and in Courtney's they saw the reflection of their own forgotten dreams. Then, a sound like thunder. The people began to chant, "The true heir, the true heir." The air trembled. Auravale itself seemed to awaken. Darius turned to flee, his power unraveling like smoke. But Caelan did not follow. He only said, softly, "Let the kingdom judge its king." As the guards seized Darius and the crowd's roar filled the square, Courtney turned to Caelan, tears bright in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. He looked at her and shook his head gently. "No, my love. It's beginning." That night, beneath the reborn banners of Auravale, the phoenix flew once more, its wings unbound. Courtney stood on the balcony beside Caelan, the city below lit with torches and song. Rowan bowed, smiling for the first time in years. "The Seamstress of Eden," he said softly, "you stitched a kingdom back together." Courtney looked at Caelan, his hand finding hers. "Not a kingdom," she whispered. "A heart."
Chapter 12. The sun rose over Auravale, golden and tender, as if the heavens themselves were exhaling after a long-held breath. For the first time in years, the air carried laughter. Bells rang, not for coronation or mourning, but for renewal. Courtney Thorne stood upon the same balcony where kings once spoke commands and decrees. Now, the people below sang her name with gratitude and joy, not as a queen, not as a ruler, but as a woman who had dared to love beyond fear. The banners fluttered, reborn in color, white for peace, blue for truth, gold for the light that endured through shadows. And among them, embroidered by Courtney's own hand, a new crest shimmered. A phoenix, wings outstretched, rising from a spool of silver thread. Caelan entered quietly, dressed not in royal armor, but in simple attire, a linen shirt, the symbol of humility he'd chosen as his first act of reign. "You've been up since dawn," he said, his voice a low warmth behind her. Courtney smiled faintly, fingers brushing the embroidery. "I couldn't sleep. Every stitch of this banner feels like a prayer, for what we lost, for what we found again." Caelan stepped beside her, his gaze following the awakening city. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly,
What our lives would have been if we'd obeyed instead of defied? Courtney turned to him, her eyes alight. Then we'd be strangers wearing crowns of silence, but we chose the truth. And now, we're free. He smiled, not the smile of a prince, but of a man who had found home. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. The prisons opened, the scholars returned to the libraries, children's laughter filled the courtyards where soldiers once marched. Princess Seraphine Lysandra, now free from her bethrothal's shadow, became the new High Chancellor, uniting diplomacy with empathy. Beside her, Lord Rowan worked to rebuild the council, his loyalty now sworn not to bloodlines but to justice. And through it all, Courtney moved quietly, as she always had, teaching young seamstresses to craft not for wealth but for meaning. Mending torn garments brought from every corner of Auravale, symbol by symbol, thread by thread, she repaired the soul of her people. One afternoon, weeks after the new peace took root, Caelan found her in the workshop of her youth, the once dusty space now alive again with fabric, color, and sunlight. He leaned against the doorway, watching as she guided a small girl's trembling hands with gentle patience. You hold the needle, but it's your heart that chooses what to create. Every stitch carries intention, and intention changes the world. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes softened. "You always find me here," she teased. Caelan smiled. "It's where you belong. You don't just sew dresses, Courtney. You sow hope." She blushed, brushing her hands on her apron. "And what of you, Your Grace? Have you come to inspect the royal tailor?" He shook his head, stepping closer. "I've come to steal her away for an hour." "Only an hour?" "An eternity, if you'll allow it." They walked through the gardens, once burned, now in bloom. The air was thick with jasmine, roses, and the low hum of bees. Caelan paused beside the fountain, its waters restored, the marble gleaming anew. "This is where it began," he said, "the night I saw you, when you dared to speak truth in a hall of silence. And you listened, when no one else would." He took her hands in his eyes deep with tenderness. "Courtney Thorne, you mended more than my kingdom. You mended me. I was born to rule, but I live because of you." Her throat tightened, tears shimmering. "And I was born to sew, but I learned to love because of you." For a heartbeat, the world held still. The city, the wind, the sky, as if all creation waited for their next breath. Then he kissed her, slow, certain, timeless. And somewhere, the bells began to ring again. Years passed, and their love grew not into legend, but into living memory. The people of Auravale came to call her the Seamstress of Eden, the woman who wove a broken world back together with the golden thread of love. And when the children asked her what it meant, she always smiled and said, "It means you don't have to be powerful to change the world. You only have to love enough to not give up." On the day she placed her final stitch, a tapestry depicting the phoenix rising over Auravale, Courtney stood beside Caelan, her hair streaked with silver, her hands still graceful. He looked at her, wonder in his eyes that time could not fade. "The phoenix," he said, softly. "It will outlive us." She nodded. "That's the point." And as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, the city bathed in gold, their fingers intertwined, two souls who had defied a world that demanded silence and instead chose to sing. Their love became the thread the world would never forget.
Some loves are whispered in secret, others change the course of destiny. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe,
like, and share for more tales that remind us that true love always finds its way. Written by PK. Narrated by Whisperglass Stories.